All right, so get this. We're going deep today, like seriously deep. We're diving into the Communist Manifesto and some other writings by Marx and Engels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so whether you're like cramming for a big meeting or just genuinely curious about this stuff, we're going to break down how Marx and Engels saw the whole bourgeoisie thing, their rise, their predicted fall, and what they thought a communist future would look like. Pretty intense, right?
Yeah, it can be. A lot of people get kind of lost in the details and the jargon.
Totally. And they don't exactly make it easy, do they? Like
Uh-huh.
right off the bat, the manifesto says something pretty wild about the bourgeoisie. It says it has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals.
Hmm.
I mean, that's some serious praise, right? Why all the hype?
Well, think about it. It's 1848 when they're writing this. The bourgeoisie, they were like this new kid on the block, historically speaking, but they had already turned the world upside down.
Yeah.
Marx and Engels saw them as this like unstoppable force that had smashed feudalism and brought in a whole new era of industry, global trade, and crazy new technology. They literally reshaped everything.
So they were giving credit where credit's due, like acknowledging how powerful the bourgeoisie were, almost setting them up as a worthy opponent before, delivering the knockout punch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. Marx and Engels argued that the bourgeoisie are, in a way, their own worst enemy. Like, they're digging their own grave.
Right, right.
By creating industrial capitalism, they're also creating the very thing that will eventually destroy them, the proletariat.
The gravediggers, as they so dramatically put it.
Exactly. They saw that to fuel this huge expansion of industry, you'd inevitably need a massive working class, right? People who work in the factories, operate the machines, and churn out all those products.
Yeah, makes sense.
But it's not just about the sheer number of workers. It's about the system itself. Marx and Engels argue that capitalism is built on contradictions.
Okay, so more on that.
They believe that this constant push for profit would lead to a situation where factories are pumping out more stuff than people can actually afford to buy. And that, they said, would trigger all sorts of economic chaos. Recessions, depressions, the whole shebang. The system would always be teetering on the brink.
Interesting. We usually think of a crisis as something that comes from outside the system, like a war or a natural disaster.
Yeah.
But they're saying that crisis is built into the very foundation of capitalism.
Yeah, it's just part of its DNA.
And the ones who really suffer when these crises hit are...
The proletariat, of course.
Yeah.
They're the ones who lose their jobs, who struggle to make ends meet, who bear the brunt of it all. And that's what fuels their anger, their sense of being alienated.
Okay, let's talk about this alienation thing. It's kind of a key concept in Marx's work, but honestly, it can be hard to wrap your head around. What did they really mean by it?
Well, they argue that under capitalism, work becomes meaningless. Instead of creating something with your hands, with your skills, you're just a tiny cog in a giant machine, doing the same repetitive task over and over. You're alienated from what you produce, which you often can't even afford to buy yourself. And you're alienated from your fellow workers because you're all competing for the same limited jobs and resources.
So it's not just about being core. It's about this deeper sense of disconnect, like a psychological or even spiritual thing, right?
Exactly. And that alienation, combined with the misery caused by capitalism's instability, well, that's what leads to class consciousness, according to Marx and Engels.
Right, right. Class consciousness, another big one. Break that down for us.
It's the moment when the proletariat start to see their shared interests. They begin to understand their common struggles and the potential power they have if they act together.
Okay.
It's a shift from thinking me, to thinking us. It's about realizing they belong to a social class that can actually change the entire system.
So it starts with individual struggles, like little sparks of resistance here and there, but it can grow into something much bigger and more organized.
Exactly. The manifesto describes how the proletariat will go through different stages. At first, it's forming unions, going on strike, maybe even riots. But eventually, they realize that they have, and I'm quoting here, nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property.
Wow, that's quite the statement. So they're not just asking for a bigger slice of the pie. They want to bake a whole new pie.
That's the end goal, yeah. And Marx and Engels saw this as a historical inevitability, not some idealistic dream. They believed the contradictions within capitalism would ultimately lead to its downfall.
So like I said before, the bourgeoisie are creating their own downfall.
In a way, yeah. But it's not just the proletariat who will rise up. The manifesto also points out that sections of the ruling classes are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or are at least threatened in their conditions of existence.
So it's not just a simple workers versus capitalists thing. Others will join the revolution, people who see that their own interests are aligned with the proletariat.
Exactly. Now, one of the most controversial parts of their vision, and one that's often misunderstood, is the idea of abolishing private property.
Yeah, I can see why that would freak people out. It sounds like the government coming to take away your house and your car and your toothbrush.
Right. That's a total misrepresentation. What Marx and Engels were talking about was abolishing a very specific kind of private property, the kind that lets a tiny elite control the means of production, the factories, the land, the resources, that allows them to exploit everyone else's labor.
So, not your personal belongings, but that massive concentration of wealth and power that creates inequality.
Right. Under communism, they argued, the means of production would be owned and controlled by society as a whole.
Which brings us to that famous line from the Manifesto. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriations.
That's crucial. They weren't advocating for everyone to be equally poor, but for everyone to have equal access to the means of creating wealth.
So it's about redistributing power, not just possessions.
Exactly. And another institution that Marx and Engels saw as being tangled up with capitalist exploitation was the family.
Oh yeah, they didn't hold back on that either. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Pretty strong words. Wait, are they saying they want to abolish love and affection?
No, not at all. Remember, they were looking at these things through a specific lens, how economics work under capitalism. They saw the bourgeois family as a way of keeping class inequality going. It's about inheritance, about passing down wealth and privilege to the next generation.
So basically, they thought the traditional family was a tool to keep the bourgeoisie in power.
Right. And they argued that in a communist society where everyone owns the means of production and there's no more exploitation, the old family structure would just naturally fade away.
But then who would raise the kids? Who would take care of the elderly?
That's where their vision gets really interesting. They imagined childcare and education becoming things that society as a whole takes care of. Individuals wouldn't be tied down by the traditional family structure.
So a more communal way of raising the next generation.
Yeah, exactly. And when people accused them of wanting a community of women, they pointed out that in bourgeois society, prostitution, both public and private, already exists as a result of the capitalist system.
Ouch, a good point. Like, take a look at your own system before you start judging.
Right. They were trying to turn the tables and expose the hypocrisy of bourgeois morality.
Makes you think. Okay, we can't talk about the manifesto without talking about when it was written. They wrote this when Europe was a powder keg, right? Revolutions were popping up everywhere.
Yeah.
It felt like change was in the air. And the manifesto itself became super influential. Like, it was a rallying cry for social movements all over the world.
Absolutely. And even though it was written over 170 years ago, the ideas are still relevant today. Think about all the debates we have about income inequality, corporate power, the role of government in the economy. Marx and Engels were wrestling with these same questions way back then.
So it wasn't just some ivory tower philosophy. It was meant to inspire action, to get the working class fired up.
Exactly. Now, one historical event that Marx and Engels studied very closely was the Paris Commune of 1871.
Oh, yeah, the Paris Commune. That short-lived experiment in radical democracy where the working class actually took control and tried to build a new kind of society.
Right. And even though it was crushed after just a couple of months, it had a huge impact on how Marx and Engels thought. They saw it as a sneak peek into what communist society could actually look like, a real-world example of the proletariat putting their ideas into action.
And they really did try to put those ideas into practice, right? They abolished the standing army, they set up workers' cooperatives, and they tried to create a more direct and democratic government.
Exactly. They were taking the theory and making it real, trying to create a society based on those principles we've been talking about.
And even though it ultimately failed, the Paris Commune inspired people all over the world. It showed that another way was possible, that things didn't have to stay the same.
It's a reminder that revolutionary movements can have a lasting impact, even if they don't succeed right away.
Right. It's about planting those seeds for future change.
Exactly. Now, another key thing to understand about Marx and Engels is that they were writing during the rise of industrial capitalism, especially in 19th century England.
Oh, yeah. They saw firsthand how brutal early industrialization was. Those factories were awful, Child labor was rampant, and there was just so much poverty and inequality.
They saw it all.
And their critique of capitalism wasn't just some academic exercise, it came from their lived experience.
Absolutely. It was grounded in the reality they were seeing all around them.
Which makes it even more powerful. And it's amazing how many of the things they wrote about back then, the concentration of wealth, the way workers are exploited, the endless pursuit of profit, are still relevant today. I mean, the world is so different now, but those problems are still with us.
It's true. Think about the 2008 financial crisis, or the fact that the gap between the rich and the poor is still widening in many parts of the world. Marx and Engels saw the seeds of those problems way back in the 19th century.
It's like they were looking into a crystal ball or something.
In a way, yeah. Their analysis of the built-in problems of capitalism, how it tends toward overproduction, crisis, and inequality, well, it's still incredibly relevant today.
It's a little scary to think about, but it's also good to know that their work gives us a way to understand these problems and maybe even find solutions.
Exactly. Now, it's worth pointing out that not all their predictions came true exactly as they thought.
Oh, yeah.
For example, they thought that socialist revolutions would happen first in the most developed capitalist countries like England or Germany.
But that's not how it went down, right? Didn't the first successful socialist revolution happen in Russia, which was still pretty undeveloped at the time?
You got it. And that unexpected turn of events really shaped how Marxist theory and practice developed in the 20th century. It raised a whole bunch of new questions about how revolutions could happen in less industrialized countries, the role of peasant farmers, and how socialist states could exist in a capitalist world. A lot to think about.
So their ideas were being tested and refined by the very events they were trying to analyze.
Exactly. That back and forth between theory and practice, between ideas and real-world events, well, that's a key part of their legacy.
It shows that even the smartest people can't predict everything that's going to happen in history.
That's for sure. But their work gives us some really